Welcome back into Unique Pathways presented by H3 Sports. I'm your host once again, Ben Rekosh. Today I am joined by a very great guest. That is Kellie Booth. Kellie is a graduate of Cornell, a native of Charlottesville, Virginia, and currently serves as a leader for CavFutures, the official name, image, and likeness collective for University of Virginia Athletics. So, really fun conversation diving into the world of NIL, getting some information on what it's like at UVA and kind of how this landscape is changing nationally. So, really appreciate Kellie for taking some time with me today to sort of sit down and dive into all of that. So, without further ado, I hope you enjoy this show and stay tuned.
Unique Pathways is sponsored by Piedmont Realty Holdings, building better together. Bellaterra Landscaping and Hardscaping Services. ECS Prosthetics, we come to you. Jeff Burton Consulting, charting your path to a successful outcome. Major League Mindset, results on and off the field. Blue Sky Property Management, own your experience. BSN Sports, the heart of the game. And by Croze Sports, community, family, and sports.
We now welcome onto the show a very special guest today. It is the CavFutures Director of Marketing, Media, and Athlete Engagement, a former captain of the Cornell polo team and the native of Charlottesville, Virginia. That is, of course, I am talking about Kellie Booth. Kellie, thank you for joining the show today. Really excited to get into it. A lot to get to today with the ever-evolving nature of name, image, and likeness in college athletics. But before we dive into it, I kind of want to talk about your title that I mentioned, Director of Marketing, Media, and Athlete Engagement. That kind of encompasses a lot. How would you summarize kind of what that is?
Oh, it's a long business card for sure. But I think it really comes down to just being a resource for athletes and start to
Mhm.
finish being there for them, whether that's, day one of talking about building your brand and, your social media and understanding how to market yourself and, what strategies you might be able to incorporate to actually negotiating with businesses, working on contracts or reviewing contracts, and then the actual execution of partnerships. So when it comes down to the content or the marketing campaign or the strategies, the social media involved in those partnerships, I help oversee you really start to finish for those partnerships. And then also working with the collective as well of helping educate, UVA fans about CavFutures, what NIL looks like at UVA, being able to get our name out there and help people understand how they can support our athletes.
Awesome. What would you say a day in the life of the director of marketing, athlete engagement, media, and all those things entails? Is it mostly working with the student athletes? Is it mostly communicating with the board of CavFutures? Is it something between that we don't know about?
Yeah, I would say it's different every day. It's one of the
Yeah.
best parts about my job is that, you never really know exactly what a week is going to look like based on what's going on, what projects we have, the athletes that I get to serve, which is definitely a highlight of what I get to do. And so there are a lot of those, one-on-one meetings, talking to athletes, trying to understand what they're looking for and how I can help them and what resources we can provide. I spent a lot of time talking with businesses as well, doing again
Yeah.
like that education piece. There's a lot of questions about what NIL looks like and how to get involved from the business side. And then we also work really closely with the athletic department as well. So
Mm.
that comes down to quite literally like compliance office that at McHugh versus also working with Virginia Sports Properties. We're an official sponsor of UVA, and
Yeah.
so we work with their marketing team, and we also work with the Virginia Athletics Foundation, who is simultaneously fundraising for scholarships and other types of important causes for athletes. And so there's a lot of moving parts, but every day looks a little bit different.
So there's a lot of moving pieces to what you do. When you tell someone that you work with CavFutures or work in the NL space, what do they suspect that your role is on a day-to-day basis, and how is that maybe different from, the perception of what NIL is?
This is a good question, and one I get a lot. I think a lot of people are curious, what actually goes into it. And I think the focus obviously ends up, especially in my role of being in, traditional NIL and brand sponsorships, it might just sound like it's a lot of, okay, this athlete likes this brand and now they have a partnership, and this athlete wants this brand and now they have a partnership, when there's really a lot that goes into it. Like I was saying, of we might have a first year who just joined the women's basketball team, and she has no idea how to get started. And so I'm sitting down
Yeah.
and working with her on the bare basics of like, let's do an audit of your social media. Let's think about what your personal brand should be. Let's get you to events in Charlottesville so we can start to grow your name. And then we get to have the conversations about what types of, sponsorships you might want to pursue in the future. But
Uh-huh.
a lot of that groundwork as well. And there's definitely just a lot of different moving pieces to each of those partnerships. And so I think
Yeah.
that would be what probably would surprise people the most.
Yeah, before we get into a lot of detail, I want to know you've been at CavFutures for about a year and change now. What since you've gotten there has maybe surprised you or you didn't think was going to be a big part of what they do or what you do, or just generally what's changed over the last year?
The growth 100% has been crazy to see. I joined the team right after Maddie Walsh had left from Cav
Hmm.
Futures, so I stepped into her role a bit, but at the same time, Cav Futures are already growing. So it was a two-man team. I replaced, Maddie, and so then it was still just Lo Davis, the executive director, and myself working full time. We do have a board as well. Um, I've now grown. I have a team of about 7 interns that I work
Oh
with as
wow.
well. And we've hired two more full-time staff members since then as well. And so just watching our team grow has been exciting and helped my role change and evolve, as we've been able to add more hands. But I mean, the pure amount of athletes that we work with has just been growing exponentially, which has been really cool
Yeah.
to see, but also comes with a lot more work.
So this show, as you know, is aptly titled Unique Pathways, talking about different sort of journeys that athletes, coaches, people around sports took to where they are today. And I think that if you had said maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago that you would be working with NIL, first of all, people would have no idea what NIL stands for. But I think that just the evolution of college athletics is really cool. So I want to dive into a little bit about how you got there, and then we'll talk about that
Yeah.
evolution. So, as I mentioned at the top, native of Charlottesville, graduated from St. Anne's. Just tell me a little bit about what life was like. Was sports always something that you wanted to really pursue with the rest of your career? And how did that shape up early?
I mean, you said it that I wouldn't have guessed that NIL would be where I ended up, maybe even 2 years ago. I think it's such a new and evolving space. And I think when I look back, it makes more sense about thinking about the experiences that I've had and the skill set that I have that I've ended up in a place where I get to, learn about things that I'm excited about and use skills that I'm passionate about, but at the same time wouldn't have predicted it. And so it's been cool to see those pieces come together. I think really started when I was a freshman in college. I was
Hmm.
lucky enough to go to an event where Carla Williams was speaking, and she's done a phenomenal job as the athletic director here at UVA and is really a role model and inspiration to me. And she had an event where it was all women in Charlottesville that came together to talk about
Mm.
supporting UVA athletics, and that was something that I had never really seen before, and I felt like created a space for me where I was like, this is really cool, and this is something I want to be a part of, and it's new and it's different, and I think she did a great job, spearheading that of trying to make sure that not just the husbands of the families that were supporting UVA
Right.
athletics were involved, but the wives as well, which I think was really important and started to kick off my love of like, hold on, there might be a space for me in this.
Yeah. You talk about going to Cornell. Cornell, first of all, an amazing school. You were a part of the polo team there, as I mentioned. What's polo like for people that don't know? Is it a huge thing in the Ivy League? Is it a huge thing in Charlottesville that maybe some people don't know? Just what's the experience like playing polo?
It's a different sport. I mean, a lot of people will assume water polo, and I will always say thank you so much that you think that I'm capable of doing that. That's a crazy sport. Um, but no, I was really lucky, honestly, to just grow up in a place where it existed. I grew up around horses, but I always loved team sports, and so I played just about every sport I could get my hands
Yeah.
on growing up, and horses had a special place, in my heart. But it wasn't until I found polo when I was about 11 or 12 at the Virginia Polo Center, which is literally 10 minutes outside of town, that I realized that, there's kind of a combination where I could be on a team and I could have that, competitive, it's a contact sport, it's a heavy team sport, while still being able to be around horses. And so I ended up, really diving into that and making it the sport that I wanted to put as much time and attention into as I could, playing travel and really developing my skill sets over the summer. And then I got into a bit of a spot where at that point, Cornell and UVA were pretty tense rivals. And so I have a family connection to Cornell and had grown up, going up there to visit and love the school, love the opportunity, and felt like I wanted to make a change for myself. So I did end up going to Cornell for undergrad. Got a lot of jokes from my teammates who many of whom stayed, in Charlottesville or played for UVA. And felt like I got to kind of have a cool full circle moment when I came back to play here at UVA as a grad student. But it is a really fun sport. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it because you kind of see the movies of like, the British
Yeah.
royal family or the big grass field where as college polo is actually pretty gritty and it's in an arena and it's smaller and it's really physical and can feel like a battle that's not quite the like wine and fancy hats that a lot of people imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. No, polo seems like a really cool sport. I've only seen a little bit of it, but it seems like it's just coming about. And obviously, UVA and Cornell, you talk about that rivalry they have. At Cornell, you were part of the video production team for some of the ESPN productions, some of the sports productions. I read about that and it seems really cool. So, kind of what was it like getting into that, and then the experience of having hands-on work there while you were studying sports media. That seems like a great experience.
It really was. I was really lucky, honestly, to fall into the hands of a great mentor in Eldon Lindsay, who became my boss at Cornell. But how it started was kind of just a leap of faith moment in that when COVID shut everything down, we were doing classes remotely. I wasn't
Yeah.
able to practice or play polo, and so I found myself with way more time on my hands than I was used to, and kind of rediscovered an old passion that I had with videography in particular. And so I ended up
Mm.
just sending a DM, honestly, to the Cornell Sports Instagram page. It's probably 2020, 2021 at the time, and just said, hey, can I meet whoever runs this? Like, this is a really cool account. I'm a big fan. I would love to meet you and ask you some questions. And so that was how I ended up meeting my future boss. And we had a chat out at the football field because it was still COVID, but he essentially said that if I had, the passion and the drive to learn, that he was willing to teach me. And so I started really from no experience and was able to learn a ton from him. Got some really, really cool opportunities while doing that. And then the big challenge was obviously when sports came back and it was time to go back to
Right.
classes in person, go back to practice, go back to travel for games, trying to keep up. Both of those passions that I had was a bit of a challenge, but I did know at that point that that was something that I wanted to pursue, in the long term. And so it was worth it to me to, try to figure out how to allocate my time to make everything happen.
And what I read a little bit about too is that you kind of had a passion and a focus for mini documentaries. Is that right?
Yeah.
What are some of the coolest ones that you did there?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, the one that was closest to my heart was for Hoyfield up at
Uh-huh.
baseball, or for the Cornell baseball. My dad played baseball up at Cornell, and that was
Oh wow. Yeah, that's
previously
cool.
one of the oldest baseball fields in the country, and it's really cool. It's right in the heart of campus, and unfortunately, it did end up being torn down, in the past 2 years, and so that was something that for my family was a big deal to lose that field. And I ended up being able to do a really cool interview series through coaches and old players and, including my dad about their experiences playing there, the history tied to that field. And that ended up being a project that I was really, really proud of.
Yeah. How do you think that sort of your work with the documentary style of media has informed what you do today with NIL?
That's a good question too. I think a lot of like I was saying before, I think there's a lot of pieces that were separate initially, but ended up coming together really well in what I do now and what I'm passionate about. And
Hmm.
part of that was my major in undergrad was sociology, and I was able to focus a lot of my research and studies on representation for athletes in the media, with a focus especially on female athletes. And so that became something that I was really passionate about, is realizing how much of an impact you can have through creative media on people's perceptions of athletes, but also, the world around them. And so I think I sort of found that as a medium where I was like, you know what, I can really make an impact, not just for athletes, but
Yeah.
really in my community is in general by how I tell these stories.
Yeah. And then you graduate from Cornell in 2022, come back to Charlottesville, get your master's at the School of Commerce. What was that decision for you, and what was your focus when you came back to school?
I think it was really just putting a whole package together. Like I knew I had a lot of different skill sets and interests at that point, but I didn't feel like I was ready made to go into the workforce. Like I felt like I needed that one last step, and McIntyre was a really, really cool opportunity. I've always loved travel and languages as well. I studied Spanish,
Hmm.
Arabic, and Italian while I was in college, just kind
Oh,
of for
awesome.
but so the opportunity to travel while I was, in McIntyre was great as well. I probably would have been someone that would have studied abroad, but between COVID and athletics, that wasn't
Yeah.
really an option that I had. And so it kind of felt like I could do a lot of things. I could get to come home, put on the orange and blue and play at my home club. I could also, really take that last step for myself into the business world. But I also got to have a few weeks where I could see the world and
Yeah.
experience that before, really buckling down and getting to work.
What were those couple of weeks like? Where did you go? What did you see? What was the coolest thing you ate? I don't know.
It was awesome. I mean, another part about polo is that Spanish is really popular. It's a very South American sport, and so a lot
Uh-huh.
of the culture around the sport that I've been playing now for the past decade is really focused in South American sport or language, culture, all of those things. And so
Wow.
we were able to go to my group specifically went to Colombia, Chile, and
Mm.
then Argentina, which I got to finish in Argentina, which is really the capital of polo in the world. And so it was super cool to get to go down there. And they weren't in season, unfortunately, but I got to go see, some of the big polo stadiums that I grew up watching. And
Yeah.
um, we visited with local businesses while we were there too. So it was, pretty educational as well, just learning about how all of those different businesses worked and the challenges they faced and how they confronted those.
What do people not know about polo that they need to know? Maybe about just the growth of the sport generally, the globalization of it, because you're obviously really passionate about this sport, and it exists in Charlottesville, but it's obviously not huge. What do people need to know about this great sport?
I think how much it exists all around you. Like I think that is one of the things people assume immediately is, like they hear I play polo in Charlottesville and they think where? And it is really right down the road. And so being able to understand that it exists and it's here and there's a lot of people working hard to elevate the sport and also increase access. I think that's
Yeah.
another thing that's always been really important, for me to help people understand too, is especially college polo is they really try to make it accessible. It's no sport where you don't need your own horses. And so all through, my college career, I was playing on college horses and was able to be a part of something that, at the highest level, polo obviously is harder to break into, but through the collegiate level, I would just encourage, especially younger kids, to give it a try and go see and head to their local club and learn more about it because it's an amazing sport. It's challenging, but it teaches you a lot.
So as you graduate from UVA in spring of 2023, you almost immediately take the gig with CavFutures. I read that you had a prior connection with Lo Davis, but how did this come about? Was it always in your interest to kind of work so closely between the athletic department and the athletes and now this new sector of college athletics? When did this come to a realization that it would be a possibility for you?
It was it happened fast.
Yeah.
But it was a really fun opportunity that I was excited about when Lowe ended up, extending the offer to me. He had been someone who I'd had conversations with, obviously from his history at the VAF to um then taking on Cav Futures. He's really well connected in the world of sports, especially in Charlottesville. And so
Hmm.
it was someone who was kind enough to be offering me, advice and mentorship on my own early stages of my career, and then as that opportunity opened up at Cat Futures, the conversation turned more into how can I help you get a job elsewhere to can you
Yeah.
just come and work here,
Yeah.
um, which was cool. I think what was a big draw for me was honestly the startup environment, which because it's so new
Hmm.
and because it's changing I got to try so many new things really quickly. I definitely had to battle some imposter syndrome early on as well because I felt like I maybe wasn't qualified yet to be put in the positions that I was given the opportunity to be in. But at the same time, I just had phenomenal support from Lo, who really believed in me and my skill
Yeah.
set. So that was definitely, encouraging as well when a month into my job, I was, asked to lead and direct a commercial photo shoot for McDonald's, and that's something I
Yeah.
had no idea how to do, but it turns out with a little bit of guidance and some extra belief in yourself, you can get it done. It wasn't flawless, but we learned a lot, and that's been a lot of my experiences here, honestly.
That's great. One of the things I read is that early on last winter, one of the biggest things that you notice is the amount of misinformation or misconceptions around the NIL space, not just in Charlottesville or Virginia, but around the country. What do you think are a couple of the biggest pieces of misinformation that have been spread, and just the widest misconceptions? Because there are pro and cons list of NIL put out every day by multiple networks. There are, people talking on ESPN about this and people talking on CBS about that. What do you think people need to learn about where the space is and where it's going?
I think the biggest misconception is absolutely the cost. I mean, that the
Hmm.
numbers that you see in headlines may or may not exist. Sometimes they don't. But in some cases they do. It's just that that's the rare, 1% of what NIL looks like. And so being someone
Right.
that's in the space and seeing it every day, I can tell you that 90+% of my interactions are not with those high dollar earners, but are instead, what the real root of NIL was, which is student athletes who don't have time to work a full-time job and who are working their butts off for this university. And at the end of the day, they need support too. Like I think the more you learn
Yes.
about the stories of those individuals and what they're doing with the money that they're earning, whether it's being able to buy a ticket for their mom to come and fly and see them play in a college game because she hasn't been able to come do that before. Like there's all
Hmm.
kinds of things that pop up. It might just be that their car has an issue and they need to get it fixed and they otherwise can't afford- like there's just
Yeah.
real life experiences that NIL has the ability to improve and impact these student athletes, and they're so deserving. But I think it really gets a bad rep when you focus on those big dollar numbers. And that's again not to say that those don't exist or that there's not, real issues or conversations that need to be had about, figuring out what NIL is going to look like and what regulations we need going forward. But I think there's a lot of missed stories that exist about the good that NIL does, for student athletes.
Well, that's kind of where I wanted to go next. If you look at where this space is right now, look at it 2 years ago, and then look at it maybe envisioning 5 years from now, it's obviously still in its infancy stage in the grand scheme of the impact on college athletics. Where do you see it going? What needs to be fixed? What's working well? What's your dream for what NIL means in the future? Just generally, what do you think is going well? What do you think needs to be improved?
I mean, I think we've opened the floodgates, and there's a benefit to that. As I was talking about, that we've now given student athletes an opportunity, to capitalize on the platform and the brand that they build for themselves, the success that they have as student athletes, before having to wait to get to the pro level, which might not ever happen.
Hmm.
But at the same time, like I said, that regulation is really needed. I think we're still waiting to see where that's going to come from, and obviously what it might look like. But I do think that transparency is a real issue that we struggle with right now as well, that without regulations, there's not really any clear indicators of exactly what's going on, at other schools or, in other areas with our student athletes in general. And so I think that's an issue that we'll need to address as well, is
Hmm.
figuring out the right level of transparency while simultaneously obviously wanting to protect our student athletes' privacy is something that's important to us too. So I think navigating those two will be a balance that we'll have to strike. But, at the end of the day, like I said, I'm really passionate about how media can impact our perceptions of people, and my
Right.
passion for female athletes in general and helping support them and build a platform for female athletes is something that I'm passionate about. But that is really challenging in the NIL space because when it
Hmm.
exists in a free market, the free market is not equal for male and female athletes. And so that is very much an uphill battle. And I'm curious to see as collectives and universities, become more aligned and with new dollars and the ability for universities to pay student athletes directly, I think Title IX will have a really strong
Right.
impact as well. And just figuring out exactly what that looks like, but also making sure that, we're advocating for our female student athletes is going to be interesting.
It seems like as NIL grows and as these different bills get passed in Virginia and Missouri, Title IX is consistently one of the things that gets brought up in the challenges of keeping this space equitable while still allowing it to have some capitalistic integrity and going to the free market and stuff. How important do you see that, and how influential how important is it to these people making the decisions that Title IX really is there every step of the way?
I mean, it's hugely important. I know UVA in particular, it can be frustrating at times, but they take a conservative approach just when it comes to understanding exactly what rules and regulations are, how to be fair and how to make sure that we're operating in a sense that doesn't break rules and that isn't, unfair outside the lines. And so I think it's huge for UVA in particular to make sure that we follow those rules, but at the same time, understanding the finances of an athletic department is important. And that's where we've seen a
Right.
huge push for support for football because at the end of the day, football is our main revenue sport here at UVA. And so if we can't remain competitive in the football terms, then we also are not going to be able to, support our female student athletes. So I think that's become a big emphasis as well of like what supporting female athletes looks like sometimes is supporting football because at the end of the day, the better our football program is, the more revenue they earn, and then the more support they can provide to our other
Yeah.
female athletes as well. And so I think that can be a little bit conflated or confusing sometimes to follow as a fan of, okay, you said, support female athletes, so why does that mean support football? But I think
Right.
that's something that, our athletic director, Carla Williams, is really great about understanding and supporting is that the football team is key, and we need to make sure that they're well funded and set up for success so that we can make sure that as expenses rise to be a competitive athletic department, that doesn't mean that we have to cut teams.
And then from a marketing perspective, which is kind of your wheelhouse, I assume that these young men and women understand the amount of impact that they can have on the community, but also what these deals have on their lives. Just being in an EA college football game, or being in a McDonald's commercial, or going to an appearance at a taco shop, whatever it may be, it goes both ways to benefit. And is that something that you're consistently talking to everybody involved about?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the big pillars of my initial conversations with an athlete is what's valuable to you. Because
Yeah.
it might be money, but it might be a lot of other things too. And, it might be services, it might be food, it might be your favorite clothing brand. It might be a whole variety of things that when we're talking about creating, a partnership, we have to understand what's important to us. And sometimes that might just be that this athlete wants to build their brand. They want to have case studies of content that they have created for a brand that they love so that they can then go pursue another partnership with real evidence of, here's how I create content and here's how I can advocate for your brand. So I think there's even an argument sometimes for doing a partnership for free because it might be a brand
Hmm.
that you really align with and you care about, and that's going to give you an opportunity to grow and develop your platform so that there might be another opportunity, down the road. And so I think the focus on money, or the misconception of the focus on money can be a main focus of that
Yeah.
conversation is just understanding what can this business offer and what are you interested in. And I'm really transparent with the businesses as well of, coming in as a middleman that obviously my job is to be a resource for these student athletes, but at the same time, I want that business to want to work with more athletes. So I'm
Yes.
not here to scam or trick them or try to, haggle them into something that they're not going to be happy with after because I want them to come back and I want them to sponsor another student athlete or want to work with more student athletes in the
Yeah.
future. So I think that communication across the board just has to be really honest in order for everybody to leave, feeling content with the partnership that they have.
Just a tangent here. How excited were all of the football players to be in the EA game this summer? Because I know I saw it on social media. Everybody was so hyped for finally this coming back, and just to see your name and your face in the video game that you play every day. It's got to be really cool for them.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think the community piece is really cute as well of, seeing football players repost their family members that are playing a game with, their cousin or their brother, whoever it is that's now in that game. And I think, like I said, it just goes to show that the value isn't always money. It might just
Yeah.
be that this is a really cool opportunity or this is something that you think is fun or you just love the brand. And so understanding that and being able to make the right moves to be able to end up in that kind of position is the smart thing to do.
Yeah, and then asking about CavFutures specifically, and I think a lot of programs around the country do this as well, but there's a strong focus on on foundational work, on charitable work, on other organizations that don't necessarily pay and aren't flashy like McDonald's, McDonald's, Boys and Girls Club, things like that. How do you see this balancing out, and how important do you see it for the sanctity of NIL, just going forward for the balance of the student athlete's sake?
Yeah, I mean it's probably the most difficult thing for people to understand that I've seen is the separation between CavFutures, the official NIL collective of UVA, versus CavFutures Foundation, which is a standalone nonprofit. It's a 501(c)(3) organization
Mm,
that helps work with student athletes to get them involved in the community. It focuses on education, especially in the areas of financial literacy. And in general, we'll, partner with those nonprofits like you're talking about to really help our student athletes get in the community. It's been a really controversial space to have a charity involved in NIL. And so I think we were, quick to understand that this couldn't just be an ATM. This needed to be a real nonprofit that was actually
hmm
having a positive impact in our community. And so one of the coolest initiatives that we have ongoing with CavFutures Foundation at the moment is called Champions of the Community. And it's going to be an ongoing program, but thanks to the direction of a donor who specified he wanted his dollars to go back into the Charlottesville community through grants, we were able to put our student athletes through a leadership program to understand how the grant making process works, to understand how to read and evaluate those grant applications from nonprofits in the community. And they've
hmm
now helped us oversee the process of accepting grant award recipients and being able to put that money back into the community with organizations that they've had the chance to work with. So that's been a really cool way to involve our student athletes in the process of being charitable and impacting the community that they live in.
Yeah. And then from the student athlete perspective, they obviously enjoy going to the elementary schools and reading to the kids on a Wednesday morning. But how do they see this as important to their development, both as a person and as a player?
I mean, there's a lot of factors I think that come into that. I think they enjoy it for the first part. Like you said,
Yeah.
it's fun to go in and have a classroom of kids that are just screaming and excited to see you. And I think that's part of it. But at the same time, I think there's a real tangible effect of confidence building that happens, especially if you're a team that just came off of a loss, but then you get to go into a second grade PE class where they don't really care that you lost, by a few points last night. They think you're like a superhero and they just want to play basketball, in gym class with you. And so I think that experience can be kind of healing and peaceful for our student athletes when there's obviously a lot of pressure
Yeah.
that they play under. But I mean, we also talk, from a brand building sense, which obviously comes back to my wheelhouse and the meetings that I have with student athletes is that your brand is, who you show yourself to be repeatedly over time. And you do that by, showing up over time.
Yeah.
And the way that we present that, the content that we have, the stories that we tell, if we're able to put you in the position where you can show the kind of person that you are, where you can interact with kids where it's really meaningful, where you can help people in Charlottesville and have an impact on their lives, then it's on us to tell that story. But that's a way that we can help show, who these student athletes are, the type of people that they are, and help to build their
Mhm.
brand that way as well.
Yeah. A couple more on NIL topic. One word that's thrown out a lot is the word sustainability. People say that the mental health isn't sustainable for the coaches, for people like yourself that are in the position of communicating and fundraising, or like Lo Davis that has to go to all of these appearances, for the student athlete that now on top of their games and practices and schoolwork, they have to worry about doing a commercial on a Tuesday or
Mhm.
going to the Boys and Girls Club on Thursday, things like that. From the money perspective, especially, what do you think about that? Because money isn't endless, obviously, and
Mhm.
coaches of any sport consistently preach on the notion that I'm asking for so much money every year. Eventually, down the line, these people that have been putting in piles of money for 2 or 3 years now aren't going to be able to do that anymore. So, just how do you see that sort of avenue developing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pieces that go into that. I obviously from the coach's perspective, I commend them every step of the way. They have an immense amount of
Yeah.
responsibility and things to be, in charge of. But at the same time, I think we've all come to see the importance of NIL, especially at this moment. And I think that is where it stays, paramount for us right now is that while there are a lot of conversations, there's realignment conversations, there's regulation conversations, the important thing for us is to make sure that we stay at the top of the competitive level so that as those things come to fruition, we're not falling behind or left out of the conversation. So I think there's an extra emphasis on this shorter time period that we're in right now, where we can understand that it likely won't be like this forever. But I think that's where a lot of the communication to donors has to be, talking about the importance of right now this is really important and this does have a huge impact while also understanding that they've been spread thin and that we're going to
Yeah.
have return to traditional NIL and marketing opportunities in the future.
Yeah. And how do you make sure that a student athlete's schedule isn't overloaded, that they have 15 things going on every day? Because it sounds like that's sort of part of your job too, is figuring out what's right for each individual person.
Absolutely. I mean, scheduling is maybe the hardest thing that we do, especially when we're talking about events that are multi-sport, or
Yeah.
obviously have their own individual things that they need to do outside of their class schedule and practice schedule and, travel schedule, all these other pieces that are going on. But I think the first and the most important thing when I sit down with an athlete is that we talk about the time commitment and, the amount of work that goes into it because NIL is very much the type of thing that you get out of, what you put into it. So I think there's some realistic expectations conversations that need to happen, especially if it's someone who is new to the school or just starting out or isn't as big of a name yet and they really want to get into NIL that we just have a transparent conversation about the time it takes to build, your social media or to build the relationships that you need for NIL and that it doesn't have to be for everyone. Like at the end of
Hmm.
the day, if you don't want to post on social media and you don't want to go to a commercial
No
shoot
one's
and
making you do it.
yeah, you don't have to. Like I totally respect that. I think then where sometimes we can get to more of a confrontation about it can be, okay, you want to deal, but if you don't have the time and you can't show up and you can't communicate, then like that just won't work. But I do think at the same time for athletes that obviously do have, the passion and the drive, they want to show up for it, they want to be a part of it and really make the effort to do so. We really try to balance the schedules as much as we can, and obviously in our communications with businesses or whoever else might be working with these student athletes, we're really clear about the demands that they have from all
Yeah.
these other directions, and try to be respectful of their time so that, I'll always be there with them on set or whatever it is to make sure that as soon as we hit that time that I know they need to
Yeah.
go to practice, they're going to practice and they're not
Yeah.
getting, held around for another hour.
Yeah, time is money, as they say. I want to ask about your impact once again, as we kind of started this off with. As I was saying before, I kind of like to talk to people on this show about the non-traditional impacts that they have on sports. So I mean that in the sense as in 20 years ago, like I said, no one would have any clue what your job is, what it does. It wouldn't have existed 20 years ago.
Right.
So I want to get your thoughts on having that sort of impact while still being able to maintain that passion and that fanhood that you've had for UVA your entire life.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I think it kind of comes back to my origin story too of that event that I went to, with Carla Williams, where they had all these incredible women from Charlottesville that were, business owners and community leaders and women who otherwise hadn't really been included in the conversation. And I think that's been one of my goals here as well, is to try to find ways. We put on an event for women's basketball here last year where I did the same thing and I reached out to, female-owned businesses. I reached out to the women and families that had been longtime supporters of UVA athletics and really wanted to make sure that they knew that there was a space for them because I think that's such an untapped market, but also just fan group that in a lot of spaces of athletics hasn't really been included or really utilized in a way that they could have a real impact. And so I think
Yeah,
trying to be in a space that is so heavily dominated, by male athletes, which is a space of NIL, and that's just the reality of the market. It is a bit more of an unconventional approach to really just try to focus on including, female voices and including female athletes. But I think that we're part of a really incredible wave of support for women in sports. And so it's been fun to see that grow as well and to try to keep that as one of the main pillars of things that are important to me in this
Yeah.
role.
And then if there's a young boy or a young girl listening to this or watching this episode right now, maybe they're in high school and they play softball or they swim. What's your advice to them about how to navigate, how to approach this confusing name, image, and likeness landscape?
Think just educate yourself. I think there's a lot of voices in the space of NIL, but looking for the ones that, are focused on safety for athletes, are focused on, having a full understanding of what the space looks like, what the real risks are, being able to, protect yourself, especially from the athlete perspective. I think that's really huge in that in any new, market or space, there's a lot of people that want to jump in and get involved, and they might not always have the education or the experience to do so in a way that, keeps you safe and keeps you protected. And so, I think that would be a really big thing, from the athlete side is just making sure that you're really cognizant of what you're getting yourself into,
Hmm.
avoiding expensive contracts. That's a trap that we see young athletes fall into a lot of times, is that first offer that they see will include some sort of exclusivity clause, or if it's a
Right.
marketing agent that says like, this is great and I'm going to help you get deals, but also I'm going to take 10 or 20% of whatever comes to you, and they can just sit there. Like, they don't even necessarily have to get you deals. Any opportunity that comes to you, that agent would be able to take 10 or 20% out of with an
Yeah.
exclusivity contract. And so,
Yeah.
just trying to understand all of those little pieces that are pitfalls, you could potentially fall into, and obviously staying up to date as so many things are changing literally day to day.
Yeah. I appreciate you helping us educate us on this wild landscape that we're in. Before we wrap it up, I have a couple of quick NIL rapid fire fun questions for you. So, first thing that comes to mind, you just let us
Okay.
know what you think. If you could have any endorsement for yourself, what would it be?
Ooh, I'm gonna say Gatorade just because I'm a Buffalo Bills fan and I just saw the Josh Allen poster up in Buffalo, and I think that's a really cool marketing campaign.
That's awesome. Next one, who's the funniest athlete that you've ever worked with?
Kamora Johnson on the women's basketball team.
That she's a star. That team is going to be great. Really
Yes,
excited to watch
she's
that.
awesome. And a
Um,
fellow Stab alum. She went to my high school too.
that's right. Is there a moment, maybe at UVA or maybe at Cornell or any other time that you've been starstruck or blown away?
Ooh, yes, honestly, we had a project this summer with Dawn Staley, where we got to work
Oh
on
wow,
her vintage jerseys. And so I was able to, create the video that we used to launch that. And there was something about seeing her tweet the video that I made that was a really cool moment for me.
that's awesome. What's the project? Maybe you just mentioned it, but what's the project you're proudest of?
I would honestly say that the women's basketball event that we had last fall, it was really, really cool to have so many, incredible women from Charlottesville coming together to support, what has now been a record-breaking team. They just, I think, broke their season ticket holding record again this year, which is really cool. And so women's basketball definitely holds a special place in my heart, and it was really cool to be able to support them that way.
That's awesome. What's an organization that you're looking forward to working with in the future, or you just want to work with in the future?
We do have an event with Her Sports this Sunday that I'm really
Mm.
excited about. It's a local nonprofit that helps, encourage young girls to get exposed to sports they might have not seen before. So polo is one of those that we're able to help, introduce young girls to, even though they might not know it even exists here in Charlottesville. But it's run by Jessica Carter, who I adore, and I just think they have an amazing mission, and our student athletes love being a part of it.
That's great. If someone made a movie about you or about the first year at CavFutures or about the women's basketball project with Don Staley, who would you want to play you in that movie?
You know what? I'm terrible at this because I don't know the names of any actors. But I'll have to circle back to you on that. I'll do some research.
That's fine. Yeah, that's great. If you could only listen to one artist for the rest of your life, who would it be?
One artist. Oh gosh, I'm a genre bender too. So obviously grew up with like Southern country music, and then has grown over time. But
You don't have to have an answer if you don't have one.
that's a good question. I might say this is kind of out there, but I might say Chronics. I don't know if you know
Okay. No, I'll have
any
to
of
look them
the,
up, but
but that's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Now I'm going to end the show with this one question that we ask every single guest that comes on the show. And that is, what is one great piece of advice that someone has given you in life? It could be about anything. It could be about sports, marketing, anything in between that you would like to share with the rest of the world today.
My mom told me when I was growing up that you know who you say you are if you do everything that you say you will do. And so I think that's something that's helped me build my confidence over time is that if I know consistently when I say I'm going to do something that I do it, that at the end of the day, I am who I say I am and I can have confidence in myself and my capabilities because I have this whole heap of data that backs up that I do what I say I will do.
That's awesome. Hey, great piece of advice. Really appreciate you joining me today. Dive into all things NIL, not just in Charlottesville, but really nationally. This is changing. I'm sure some of this stuff will be dated by the time we post this in a couple of weeks. So this environment is changing every single day. It's really cool to look at where it's going. It's cool to watch what you're doing at CavFutures. But I'm really excited for where this landscape is going. And I appreciate you joining me today and kind of diving through it and digging through the weeds of what NAL is and what it's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great to talk to you about it, and I think it's such a cool but quickly changing topic. So
Yeah.
I'm just excited to see where it goes and be along for the ride.
Yeah, now I'm a polo fan. I'm gonna look up some highlights
There we
of polo,
go. There we
see
go.
what we can find there, and maybe that's my new sport.
I
So
love
we'll
it.
see. But
If you have
yeah,
any questions, you let me know.
hey, thanks for joining
All
me
right.
today. I'll let you go about your day, but I hope you have a good one.
Thanks, Ben. You too.
Yeah. All right, that was my conversation with the one and only Kellie Booth. Kellie, once again, thanks so much for taking the time with me on this beautiful day to sort of chat about what NIL is at UVA, what it can be, what it should be, and how to approach it from a student athlete perspective. Thanks to her. Thanks to my producer Andy Huffmeyer for putting this together. Thanks to Jeff Burton and the rest of the H3 team for making this show possible. Thanks to all of our sponsors for doing what they do and making this show be able to be on your airwaves and on your screens. Once again, if you're listening to this, really appreciate it. Really appreciate all the support we've gotten so far. It's meant a lot through season 2. There's some great episodes. We've had some great episodes. We will have some more great episodes coming up. Just a reminder to check that little follow button wherever you're listening to your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on the YouTube app, and follow us on social media, wherever that may be. You can check me out at Ben_Rekosh, BEN_REKOSH on X, which is formerly Twitter. On Instagram, same thing, no underscore, and then H3 Media as well on all platforms. So really appreciate everybody for tuning in. Thanks again to my guest today, Kellie Booth, for chatting about name, image, and likeness and her journey to get to where she is today. And stay tuned for next week and the weeks to follow for some more great episodes of Unique Pathways presented by H3 Sports.
Unique Pathways is sponsored by Piedmont Realty Holdings, building better together. Bellaterra Landscaping and Hardscaping Services. BCS Prosthetics, we come to you. Jeff Burton Consulting, charting your path to a successful outcome. Major League Mindset, results on and off the field. Blue Sky Property Management, own your experience. BSN Sports, the heart of the game. And by Croze Sports, community, family, and sports.